out. Doesn't look like Clark's worried about getting out. His bat must feel so wide.
In that session after lunch yesterday, they were both batting so aggressively. It was really good to see, because often you'll see one player take the lead, take the charge, but when you've got both batsmen being so explosive, it was very, very exciting cricket.
And some short boundaries and so a fast outfield. Everything was there. The pitch was good for batting, and the Proteas just had a horrible, horrible day. Philander had to pull out for the sore back just before the start of play, and it only got worse with Callis's hamstring. Some fine work during that little exchange where Stain was on the fence by Bill Lawry, and we were praising some writers before. Great to see Bill Lawry back in the commentary box, because he's still a standout for me. Not just because he's a Victorian.
No, all depth on side. Thanks, mate. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Now, ABC News Breakfast, as you probably know by now, can be watched live on the web.
Just visit the main ABC News website at abc.net.au/news, and you'll find a link to News 24, which is streamed live every day.
Let's check out your Friday weather now. It's good morning to Vanessa.
Good morning. Well, the stormy season is really firing up at the moment. Severe warnings are becoming quite regular throughout the afternoons, particularly throughout Queensland, northeast New South Wales and in Western Australia. Now, today in Western Australia, there is a trough from the southern interior that will trigger storms right up towards the top end. This will be backed up by a cold front in southern Western Australia later in the weekend. It's likely to cause very heavy rain, especially around Eucla on Sunday, and the computer models are indicating over 50 millimetres of rain. Very rare for this time of the year, but it is related to the warmer than normal waters in the Indian Ocean. There is another trough that will trigger stormy weather over areas in Queensland and northeastern New South Wales. So more on Queensland today. Scattered showers and storms over the tropics, showers and storms about the central and southeast districts. Further inland, the storms could be quite severe this afternoon. 28 degrees in Brisbane, still very hot over the interior, 41 degrees for Longreach. Fine but partly cloudy across most of New South Wales, apart from isolated showers and thunderstorms in the northeast throughout the afternoon. 23 the top in Sydney, 36 Bourke. A warmer day across Victoria with light east to northeasterly winds in the north and cooler sea breezes developing near the coast. 25 the top in Melbourne, 33 Mildura. Tasmania showers about the west and far south. They will clear throughout the afternoon, and light to moderate westerly winds and afternoon sea breezes. Very warm in Launceston, 25 degrees. South Australia, areas of cloud extending from the west. You could get some light showers from Coober Pedy down to Port Lincoln, and possible thundery weather over in the far west. Warmer northerly winds ahead of a southerly change tonight, but that will only affect the far west. And as far as the cricket goes, partly cloudy, a very hot day, 32 degrees today with afternoon sea breezes, and even hotter tomorrow. Western Australia, extreme fire warning for the goldfields, severe for the Eucla and south interior, showers and storms mainly in the east and along the south coast. Bit of a curve in the storms today in the northern parts, coming from the interior, arching up towards the coast through the Kimberley and across the top end. Let's take a look at the weekend now, and Brisbane, a shower or two. Partly cloudy conditions in Sydney, 25 degrees, a top of 29, partly cloudy in Perth, and for the cricket tomorrow, 35 degrees.
Good morning. You're watching ABC News Breakfast. Lots still to come, including building bridges. We'll speak with an Israeli and a Palestinian who both live here in Australia about those events of the past week and the way forward for their embattled homeland. Post-traumatic stress. We'll look at the results of a new study of soldiers that casts a surprising light on that disorder. And the party line. And our guests this week are the former Deputy Prime Minister Tim Fischer and former Labor Senator Chris Schott. Plenty to talk about there. But first, here's the news with Karina.
Thanks, Michael. Leading the news this morning, a 17-year-old Brisbane girl has fallen to her death from a hotel balcony during schoolie celebrations on the Gold Coast. Police were called to the Chevron Renaissance Hotel in Surfers Paradise, where her body was found on the pool deck. Prime Minister Julia Gillard says she has no recollection of correspondence that raises new questions about a union fund she helped set up in the 1990s. The evidence has been raised by a former colleague at the Prime Minister's old law firm, Slater and Gordon. Nick Stiant-Brown says there's a 2.5-year discrepancy in Ms Gillard's explanation of when she knew about a union loan for a house she lived in. Tasmania's lower house has yet to pass a forestry deal after a marathon debate that stretched well into the early hours. Labor and the Greens backed the bill, which aims to protect 500,000 hectares of native forest from logging. Parliament will be recalled this morning and the bill's expected to be passed. 2 men arrested yesterday over the death of Melbourne woman Sarah Cafferkey have been released without charge. Stephen James Hunter from Bacchus Marsh has been charged with her murder. Residents in Gaza and Israel are returning to normal life as the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas appears to be holding. Hamas declared a public holiday. The truce came into effect yesterday after a week of bloodshed.
We can bring you more now on the death of that 17-year-old girl on the Gold Coast. Inspector Pat Swindle says it's a tragic end to Schoolies Week.
We have detectives from the State Crime Operations Branch as well as the Gold Coast detectives conducting investigations, interviews with people to try and ascertain what actually happened. Police are seeking witnesses to the incident, and anyone who has any information can call Crime Stoppers. This week of school has been a fantastic week. The young people who have come to Surfers Paradise have been exemplary in their behaviour, and this is a very, very tragic incident that has occurred during what has been a very good week. It's too early in the investigation to speculate on what actually occurred. As I said, investigations are continuing, and we'll find out the truth in due course. Any incident in a high-rise is a concern. We do urge the young people here who are partying to be aware of the high-rises and take it easy, take care.
Well, the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip is holding 24 hours after its introduction. Hamas, which controls the area, has declared a public holiday.
The Israeli government has made it clear it's ready to send in ground troops to Gaza if the deal collapses. Phil Williams reports from the Israeli side of the border, where soldiers remain on standby.
Well, as you can see, there's a vast array of army equipment still being kept in the field here just behind the border with Gaza. And that, from the Israeli point of view, is seen as very prudent because they don't want to leave too early. They want that big stick of the potential of an invasion still hanging over the phase 2 of the talks. Now, the phase 2 are critical. What Hamas wants is the opening of the borders so that they can get free trade and movement going between Israel and Gaza to open up the economy here. What Israel wants is absolute ironclad guarantees that these sort of rocket attacks and the sniping can't happen again. How they do that, we simply don't know. It's going to be an enormous task given the level of hatred and suspicion on both sides. For the moment, the peace is holding, and that's good news, but people here in southern Israel are really quite ambivalent about the whole arrangement. I've spoken to many who felt that really what should have happened was the invasion go in and Hamas be dealt with once and for all, because they don't really trust Hamas at all. They think that this is just a temporary lull and that at some stage or another there will be another conflict. Just how long the bulk of these troops will be kept there, we simply don't know. There is some movement as we speak, but that will all depend on how these negotiations go over the next couple of days and the next few weeks. Obviously there'll be a standing down, probably first of the reservists, and then some of the regulars will leave the area, but only if it's felt that there is some sort of lasting peace, at least for the next few months.
Phil Williams there reporting from Israel. Now let's stay with that story, and to discuss just what the future may hold, we're joined by two men who were born in the Middle East, now living in Australia. Both still have very strong links to their homelands.
Ittay Flescher is a teacher at a Jewish school in Melbourne and involved in programs promoting interfaith dialogue between Jews and Muslims. And he's with us now in the studio, while in Adelaide, Professor Bassam Dally joins us. He's an executive board member of the Australian Palestinian Advocacy Network. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Ittay Flescher, I'll just start with you. Are you confident that the ceasefire that has been signed will hold?
I guess all I can do is hope that it will, because the Israelis and Palestinians, we've been fighting against each other for far too long, and this can't continue like this. Both of us want to raise children that live in peace. We want to send them to school. We want them to grow up in a normal way, just like Australian people want to have the best for their children, and I hope and pray that it does.
Bassam Dally, can I bring you into the conversation now? How confident are you that that ceasefire will hold?
I think it seems there's willing on both sides for it to happen. My only concern is that all this death and destruction is going to be all in vain. So Palestinians, I think, are hoping that at least the siege is lifted and that their loss is not sort of went in vain. I mean, there was a lot of destruction and death in the last war.
Yeah, destruction and death on both sides of the border. Why do you say it was in vain?
Well, I think as noted in the previous item of news, your reporter said that life in Israel and Palestine went back to normality. Unfortunately, what this means for the Palestinian is different what it means for the Israelis. Israelis can go sort of their lives living in a sort of modern country, while Palestinians live under siege. They can go and fish, they can travel, they can trade. Their country is being devastated, is this normality in a way? So what the Palestinians are fighting for is actually freedom, and to be able to live, as Ittay said, free, raise their children, and basically live any normal life like any other people. However, this has been denied to them by the occupation, and this is why they're fighting in the first place.
Ittay Flescher, what's your response to that? Because one of the key things that has to be negotiated now is the opening of those border crossings.
So as part of the ceasefire agreement, there were terms that Israel would ease those restrictions. People in Israel have also, for the last 10 years, people in the south of Israel have constantly been running to bomb shelters, have found it very difficult to live normal lives, especially people in the south, in Sderot, in Beersheba. I spoke to my family there yesterday, and life in the past week has been intolerable with the constant rockets, constant air raid sirens. So it's no party in the south of Israel at the moment, and I desperately want this to end. The reason the blockade is there is to prevent Hamas from bringing in more weapons and more rockets. Hopefully part of this ceasefire will involve Egypt actually enforcing that no more weapons do come in, and that would be a wonderful contribution that the Egyptian people can make. And I also want to state that Israel's beef here is not with the Palestinian people. I have many Palestinian friends, and I know that they are good people, that they want to live in peace. We want to live in peace with them. Our beef is with Hamas, an anti-Semitic organisation that preaches hate against the Jewish people, against Israel.
And Bassam Dally, can I ask you your views on, and you're certainly talking about improving the plight of Palestinians per se, but what do you think of Hamas's tactics here? And let's not forget that this is still an organisation committed to Israel's destruction.
Well, let's put some context to this. The occupation preceded Hamas, preceded PLO, preceded any of these problems. I mean, unfortunately, everybody is concentrating on the rockets, and I obviously condemn any violence from both sides. Now, Hamas already said that if Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, is to negotiate a peace with Israel, they're more than happy to accept it as long as it's put to a referendum to the Palestinian people. Hamas want peace the same way as the Israelis want peace. The problem remains is that Israel is conditioned anything that it wants to do with sort of determining the, political map of the Palestinians, who they elect, how they conduct the business. I mean, if we now take Egypt as an example of an Islamic movement that actually emerged in a way, Egypt is now the peace broker in the Middle East. So I have to basically acknowledge that Hamas was elected in a free and fair election, and they represent the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Now, the fact is that, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, and that's nobody can dispute the fact they were legitimately elected. But they are deemed a terrorist organisation by many countries, including the United States. And do you think that by changing their approach, dropping, for instance, that commitment to destroy Israel, may further the Middle East peace process? Well,
the PLO also had the same charter of actually destroying Israel at the same time, and Israel made peace with them. In fact, they didn't change the charter until 3 years after they signed the Oslo Accord. So people can call for whatever they want. Hamas has proven to be a politically mature organization, is willing to negotiate peace with Israel. The problem remains is that Israel's precondition for this is unacceptable to the Palestinians. Let me just bring the discussion a little bit away from Hamas as such. I know that the current conflict is Hamas, but the fact is the occupation is the problem. The Palestinians want to basically live in their independent states. Only peace, in my mind, will bring security to Israel. There's the superpower that they have, and the bombardment that they do, and the siege and so on cannot last forever. Now, are we blaming the Palestinians for resisting the occupation? I mean, it is their right to actually resist and live free, like the Israelis do. So the problem remains is the occupation of the Palestinian territories and the aspiration of Palestinian people for independence. Now, whatever tactics the Palestinians have used and will use is something to bring to this particular end. They started with the Intifada, the first Intifada, and the second Intifada, and there was the PLO, and then there was the Oslo Accord. And then I think the failure of the negotiation for peace and the diplomatic routes has basically fueled the pressure and the tension, and supported organizations like Hamas to grow and to basically provide an alternative. Palestinians are not a violent people by nature. They're not an extremist people by nature. What they want is what everybody else wants, simply, to live freely in peace in their own land. They have already compromised of, 78% of historical Palestine. And whoever they elect as
Bassam Dally, we'll just get Ittay Flescher to respond to some of the things that you had to say there.
So, look, I truly believe that Jews and Muslims can live in peace in 12th century Spain. We've done it in my family's from Iraq. I know Jews and Muslims live together in peace there. And I know what Hamas represents is not what Islam is about. I know that from the interfaith dialogue that I've done, that Islam is a peaceful religion. It's a magnificent religion that's contributed many wonderful things to the world in art and architecture. And I think what Hamas is doing is representing Islam and representing the Palestinian people in a way that is not bringing out their best. In terms of how a peace deal could happen, there have been dozens of surveys done where they ask Israelis and Palestinians, how would you like this conflict to end? And they consistently say a two-state solution is the way to go.
On that point, though, the poll that was conducted just ahead of the ceasefire announcement showed that 70% of Israelis were against a ceasefire.
The reason many Israelis were against the ceasefire was because they feel the ceasefire, if it doesn't hold, will result in a short lull, a month, 2 months, and then continued rocket fire and continued suffering for the people in the south of Israel. And that's not something I want to continue. And for that to happen, Hamas needs to stop what it's doing and commit to coexistence, which it hasn't done.
Bassam Dally, we're just about out of time, but just very quickly, some final thoughts from you.
Well, two quick points. One, I don't agree with Ittay that the problem is between Muslims and Jews. There's also Christians living in there, and the problem was never a religious one. The second point about Hamas and the peace deal, it has never been about the violence and the resistance. Hamas is not is fighting Israel on an ideological basis. It's basically wants freedom like anybody else. There's more to the Palestinian than just Hamas.
Bassam Dally in Adelaide, thank you very much. Ittay Flescher, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Well, let's come back home, and Queensland is the only Australian state that locks up 17-year-olds with adult prisoners. Now, that's ended disastrously for some young people, and many legal advocates are calling for change.
This week, Triple J's Hack program spoke to a young man who's been driven to self-harm by his incarceration with adult prisoners. And Hack's Tom Tilley joins us now from Sydney. Tom, good morning to you. Tell me more.
Well, Michael, this 17-year-old boy had gotten himself into a lot of trouble. He'd been busted for armed robberies and stealing cars. While he was on remand, he was given heroin and then raped. And then soon after that, he was sentenced to 11 years. During that time, he tried to commit suicide a number of times in prison. And then since he's left prison, he's also been suicidal. So he told us his harrowing story of being a 17-year-old in Queensland prisons. And we also spoke to his GP, who's spoken to a number of other young people who've been in the same situation, where they've been 17 years old, locked up with adult prisoners and been sexually abused. Now, currently, there are 55 17-year-olds locked up in Queensland prisons, and some of those are in a segregated boys' yard in the Brisbane Correctional Centre, but a number of the rest of those are in there with adult prisoners.
Now, do stories like these, Tom, are these putting pressure on the government to change these laws?
Well, there are a lot of people, lining up to add their voice to the choir of people that want change. We spoke to the president of the Human Rights Commission, Gillian Triggs, and she says these laws actually contravene the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We also spoke to a number of legal advocates saying that this needs to change, and the federal Labor MP, Graham Perrott. We couldn't get the federal Attorney General, Nicola Roxon, on the show, and we also couldn't get to speak to the Queensland Attorney General, Jared Blige, but he did send us a statement saying that they are not planning to change these laws. They say that people at the age of 17 should know better and will face the full arm of the law.
Now, Tom, another story you looked at this week was that sacking, which we also reported here on News Breakfast, of a Royal Flying Doctor pilot. What's the backstory there?
Well, a lot of the facts are still not known. What we do know is that on November 5, he was flying 2 patients and a nurse from Bundaberg to Brisbane, and he went out of radio contact for 13 minutes during that flight. Now, News Limited have reported that he was using methamphetamine and that he actually passed out at the controls of the plane. Now, the Royal Flying Doctor Service have not confirmed those reports, but there's a lot of speculation about what actually went on during those 13 minutes when he was out of radio contact. Whatever it was, it must have been very serious, because he wasn't just stood down from flying duties, he was actually sacked. And it's a very alarming story, and we actually had some pilots call in this week to the show and saying it's not always that simple for pilots. It can be very difficult, because when they are initially tested, they are stood down, and for some pilots who test false positives, and that can happen quite easily, eating buns with poppy seeds or using different medications for headaches, etc., they can be tested falsely positive, and they end up stood down and facing the stigma for those couple of weeks, and also not getting paid if they're a contractor while those results are confirmed. And it was interesting to hear those stories in the light of research that was presented in Melbourne earlier this week, where a Flinders University researcher, Anne Roach, actually said that a lot of testing, and not in aviation where it's so important, but a lot of testing doesn't necessarily make the workplace safer, because it drives people to harder drugs than marijuana, which is the most common drug. And those harder drugs go through the system quicker, so people feel that they won't be tested positive and, face the consequences at work.
Triple J's Tom Tilley, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
You're watching ABC News Breakfast. These are the top stories. A 17-year-old Brisbane girl has fallen to her death from a hotel balcony during schoolie celebrations on the Gold Coast. Her body was found on the pool deck of the Chevron Renaissance Hotel in Surfers Paradise last night.
The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, says she has no recollection of correspondence that raises new questions about a union fund she helped set up in the 1990s. A former legal colleague says there is a discrepancy in Ms Gillard's explanation of just when she knew about a loan for a house she lived in.
And Hamas has declared a public holiday in Gaza as the ceasefire with Israel appears to be holding. The truce came into effect yesterday after a week of rocket fire across the border.
Now, there was unusually heavy traffic on Sydney Harbour last night as one of the world's largest cruise ships, the Celebrity Millennium, departed. An even bigger ship entered.
The Voyager is now stationed at Circular Quay, and so is our reporter Claire Aird. Good morning, Claire. Tell us more about this very, very big ship.
Good morning, Karina. Well, that's right. You can't actually miss this one. It is huge. The Voyager of the Seas is the biggest ship to be based in Australia. It carries 5,000 passengers and crew. And to give you an idea of the size of this thing, it weighs 137,000 tonnes, which is bigger than the biggest aircraft carrier in the US Navy. Now, it also, in length, it's 311 metres, which means if you spun it around, it would be taller than Centre Point Tower, which makes you wonder how you actually park a ship this big. Well, last night, as you mentioned, the Celebrity Millennium and the Voyager of the Seas crossed paths on Sydney Harbour. It was a fairly majestic sight, increasing the number of people around the area. Then after this beautiful passage at Fort Denison, the passing of the ships, the captain carefully turned the ship around and backed it into the overseas passenger terminal here at Circular Quay. It was a very, very good reverse park, I can assure you that. Now, it's a big time in terms of tourism here, especially for the overseas passenger terminal. Around 11,000 people will be processed. That's because of the two ships being here at the same time. Now, the Voyager of the Seas will move to Melbourne afterwards, and then Hobart and Adelaide, and as well as Perth. But first, it will make an overnight cruise around Sydney Harbour to, I guess, give people a taste of what cruising is like.
Okay, and Claire, what kind of a boon is this for the local tourism industry?
Well, Karina, is expected to be a fairly sizable one. If you can think of the numbers, 5,000 passengers and crew, they need to be fed. Now, the cruise ship company has said that all of the food and the drinks will be sourced from around the Sydney area to feed this large amount of people, and that these people will also be spending their dollars in New South Wales. Now, the cruise ship industry itself has said that Australians alone will spend $2 billion on the cruising industry this season. So, Karina, you can expect that this won't be the last ship here this summer.
Claire, Ed in Sydney. We'll speak to you a bit later on.
And I reckon Australian cricket captain Michael Clarke is also cruising to a triple ton today. With more, here's Paul.
The sport news is that Australia will resume this morning at 5 for 482 at the Adelaide Oval. Michael Clarke is not out on 224. David Warner made 119 yesterday, and Michael Hussey made 103. Those were the century makers. Jacques Kallis, we just saw pictures of him from yesterday. He will bat despite a hamstring strain, but won't be able to bowl, of course, in the second innings or indeed today as Australia heads towards 5, maybe 600. To the AFL draft, and Lachie Whitfield was chosen at number 1. The former Dandenong Stingrays player, a product of the Mornington Peninsula, was chosen to go to Greater Western Sydney, as was number 2 pick, Jono O'Rourke from the Calder Cannons, and number 3 pick, Lachie Plowman, also from the Calder Cannons. So GWS getting the top 3 picks of the national draft. And the Wallabies are preparing to play Italy this weekend as a spring tour continues. There's Berwick Barnes.